My son Cody was 19 years old that October and had been hunting with me since he was 8, which is long enough to know the difference between a deer and a man and a bear and everything else that walks on 4 legs or 2 in the Ouachita Mountains of Arkansas. He was not confused about what he saw. Neither was I. We were sitting in the same box blind, which I had built on the south edge of the lower hardwood flat the previous summer out of rough-cut cedar and 2x4s from the lumber yard in Mena. A good blind, solid, 8 feet off the ground on treated posts, shooting windows on 3 sides, a small propane heater in the corner for the cold mornings. Cody and I had shared that blind for 3 seasons before the October that changed things. And we had the kind of familiarity in a tight space that comes from years of sitting still together in the dark before first light, which is a specific intimacy that hunters know and that does not have a name in most other contexts. It was not early morning when this happened. That is the thing I want to establish right away, because most accounts of this kind involve low light and uncertain conditions, and the understandable confusion that comes from trying to identify something in the edge of dawn or dusk when shadows do things to shapes and distance compresses in ways that make identification genuinely difficult. I have been in those conditions and I understand how they complicate things. This was not those conditions. It was 11:20 in the morning. I know the time exactly because I had checked my phone 20 minutes earlier and noted that the morning sit was nearly over and I was debating whether to stay through to noon or walk back to camp for lunch and a coffee. Cody had been quiet for the past hour and I could tell by the angle of his shoulders that he was getting restless, which is what happens to young men who have been sitting still for 3 hours and have not seen a deer. The sun was high, well clear of the ridgeline to the east, and the hardwood flat below us was in full October light. The white oaks and hickories at peak color, the hickory leaves golden and the oaks running red to brown. The sight lines through the timber better than they would be a week earlier when the canopy was full, or a week later when the remaining leaves would be low enough to obstruct the ground-level view. The flat is approximately 200 yards across at its widest point and maybe 150 deep, and from the blind on the south edge we could see most of it. 40% leaf drop at that point in the season. The kind of visibility that deer hunters work for and that, on this particular morning, meant we saw something we were not expecting to see with a clarity that has left no room for the kind of ambiguity I would be willing to hide behind. My name is Russell Haynes. I am 54 years old, and I have been leasing hunting land in the Ouachita Mountains for 22 years. The same 800-acre block of mixed hardwood and pine in Polk County, Arkansas, that I found through a timber company contact when Cody was still in elementary school. I drove down from Fort Smith on the first September weekend of that first year and walked the property with a compass and a topo map and knew inside 2 hours that it was the ground I had been looking for. The flat where the white oak mast falls heaviest, the ridge saddle where the bucks cross in the rut, the creek bottom that holds does on cold afternoons. 22 years of coming back to the same ground every October has produced a knowledge of that land that goes beyond any map. A knowledge by acquaintance, specific and detailed, the kind you only build by being somewhere in every weather condition and every phase of the season for a long time. I also know the Ouachita in the way that a man who has spent 22 autumns in it knows it. Not as a biologist, as a hunter, which means I have been paying extremely close attention to everything that moves in that timber for 22 years, in every light condition, at every range, from stationary positions in elevated blinds and from the ground. White-tailed deer, black bear, wild turkey, coyote, the occasional bobcat working the creek edges, armadillos in the lower bottoms in warm weather. I know all of those animals by sight and sound and track and the specific signature of their movement at distance through hardwood timber. I know them the way you know things you have been watching carefully for a long time. What crossed the lower hardwood flat at 11:20 in the morning on the 3rd day of the October season was not any of those animals, and I knew it before it had taken 3 steps into the open. I have thought carefully about whether to tell this account publicly. The considerations are practical. I still hunt that lease. I have relationships in the hunting community in Polk County, and the kind of story I am about to tell carries a social cost that I have been aware of since the afternoon of the 3rd day of October season, when Cody and I walked back to camp and made lunch and did not say much. What settled it for me is the physical evidence, the tracks I documented in the creek drainage, the fence hair and the DNA result. Cody's drawing, which is still in his truck. These things exist and they are real, and keeping them private does not make them less real, and at some point the weight of what is real exceeds the cost of saying it. I heard it before I saw it. A sound from the north end of the flat at the pine transition where the loblolly and shortleaf give way to the hardwood below. A sound that was heavy and bipedal and moving at a pace that I read in the first second as purposeful rather than startled. Not running, walking with intention. The footfalls were spaced in a way that I registered immediately as too widely spaced for a person moving fast through timber. Too regular for a bear. Too heavy for anything I expected to hear at that time of morning in that section of the flat. I put my hand on Cody's arm without saying anything, which is our signal for something is moving. Be still, and I raised my binoculars with the same motion. It came out of the pine transition into the open hardwood, maybe 70 yards from the blind, moving south. And it was in the open timber for approximately 45 seconds before it reached the creek drainage on the south side and went into the cover there. 45 seconds at 70 yards in full October morning light, both of us on it with 8-power glass from the moment it cleared the pine edge. I want to be deliberate about stating those conditions before I describe what I saw, because the conditions are the foundation on which everything else rests. This was not a glimpse in low light. This was not a shape seen for a second at the edge of dawn that the brain then fills in according to expectation or fear. This was a clear, unobstructed view of an animal crossing an open hardwood flat at mid-morning, at a range I know precisely from years of using that flat as a reference for ranging deer. For long enough that I had time to examine the gait, the build, the arm carriage, the head position, and the face when it turned briefly in our direction near the center of the crossing. 45 seconds is a long time to observe something at 70 yards through binoculars in good light. It is long enough to be certain. It was a Bigfoot. I am going to use that word, and I am going to stand behind it without apology, because it is the accurate word for what I saw, and every alternative is either evasive or wrong. 7 feet tall at minimum. I use the white oak trunks as reference, having paced off the flat in previous seasons and knowing the dimensions of the mature oaks by the familiarity of long acquaintance. And the animal was clearing the lower branches of those oaks as it walked rather than ducking under them. The lower branches on the mature white oaks in that flat run between 7 and 8 feet. The animal was not ducking. It was clearing them with room to spare. Dark brown, appearing nearly black in the shade of the canopy and showing its actual color as a very dark brown when it crossed through a gap in the canopy near the center of the flat where the October sun came through unfiltered. Covered entirely and no visible skin at the neck or the hands, which I noted because it is the detail that most clearly distinguishes what I was looking at from a person. Persons in the woods in October in Arkansas are wearing blaze orange. This had no orange on it. It had no clothing of any kind. What covered it was part of it. The arm swing is the movement detail I keep coming back to when I describe this, because it is the thing that is hardest to account for with any alternative explanation. The arms were long, longer relative to the torso than human arms, the hands passing at mid-thigh on the swing rather than at the hip. The motion relaxed and low-carrying in a way that I had read described in accounts but had not understood until I saw it. A person swinging their arms at that hang would look wrong. A bear occasionally upright does not swing its arms that way at all. What I was looking at was the arm swing of something built for bipedal locomotion in a way that differs from human proportions in specific observable ways. It turned its head in our direction once, at approximately the midpoint of the crossing. I was looking at it through 8-power glass at 70 yards in October morning light. I saw its face. I am not going to describe the face in the specific detail that accounts like this often try to provide, because the specific detail is not the point, and every description I have ever read of a Bigfoot face ends up sounding either clinical or sensational, and what I saw was neither of those things. What I will say is this. I saw enough of the face to know with certainty that it was not a person in a suit, not a bear in any configuration, and not anything that has a name in the Polk County fauna. And then it shifted its line of travel slightly to the west, a small course correction that put a few more yards between it and the blind, and continued south and went into the creek cover and was gone. Cody was on it with his own glass the entire time. We watched the same thing at the same moment from the same blind in the same light, 7 feet tall, minimum. I used the white oak trunks it passed as reference, having paced the flat on previous seasons and knowing the approximate diameter of the older trees. It was dark, the hair or fur a dark brown that appeared nearly black in the shadow of the canopy but showed brown, where it crossed a patch of direct sunlight near the center of the flat. It was walking on 2 legs with a stride I estimated at 4 to 5 feet per step, the arms swinging long and low in the specific way that I had read described in accounts but had never seen, and which, seeing it, understood immediately as something that could not be imitated by a person. The arm swing of something whose arms are proportioned differently from a human's arms, longer relative to the torso, the hands passing at mid-thigh rather than hip. It turned its head in our direction once near the center of the flat. I was looking at it through 8-power glass at 70 yards. I saw its face clearly enough that I could see it was not a person in a costume, not a bear on 2 legs, not anything that belongs to the category of known animals in the Ouachita Mountains. I saw its face, and it saw, or appeared to see, the blind, because after the head turn it shifted its line of travel slightly, a course correction of maybe 10 degrees to the west, as if putting a fraction more distance between itself and us, and then it continued south and went into the creek timber and was gone. Cody was looking through his own binoculars the entire time. After it went into the creek timber, neither of us moved for probably 30 seconds. Then Cody lowered his glass and said, without looking at me, "That was not a bear." I said, "No." He said, "And it was not a person." I said, "No." He said, "So what was it?" I said, "I think you know what it was." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah." That was the whole of the conversation we had in the blind. We sat there for another hour without saying much, which is not unusual for us in a hunting context, except that neither of us was watching for deer. We were watching the south end of the flat where it had gone into the creek cover, neither of us saying so. We walked out at noon, back to camp, and I made lunch, and while I was making it, Cody sat at the folding table with a piece of paper and a pencil, and without saying anything to me, he started drawing what he had seen. He is not an artist. He works in equipment maintenance, always has been better with his hands around machinery than around a pencil. But what he produced in the next 20 minutes was a careful and specific rendering of the animal crossing the flat, the proportions as he had seen them, the stride, the arm position. He pushed it across the table when he finished and said, "Is that what you saw?" I looked at it for a while. I said, "Yes." He said, "All right." He kept the drawing. It is in his truck. I want to spend time on the question of the black bear because it is the right question, and it deserves a complete answer. The Ouachita Mountains have among the highest black bear density in the southeastern United States, and bears in this timber can be surprisingly upright when they want to be. standing to reach food, standing to get a better smell of something, occasionally standing out of what appears to be simple curiosity. I have watched bears stand upright in this specific flat on 3 previous occasions over 22 years. I know exactly what a black bear looks like standing on 2 legs in hardwood timber in October. A black bear standing upright holds its weight differently than what I saw. The haunches are the primary support, the weight back over the hips, the forelimbs carried forward and slightly raised in the tentative way of an animal that is not built for this posture. The head sits forward on a neck that does not turn freely when the animal is upright. The body appears compressed vertically, the trunk shorter than the legs in a way that does not look like an animal designed for bipedal movement. What crossed the flat was not compressed vertically. The trunk was proportioned the way a large person's trunk is proportioned. Shoulders wide, chest deep, the weight carried over the hips rather than behind them, the stride driven from the hip in the specific biomechanical pattern of an animal that walks upright as its primary mode of locomotion rather than as a posture of convenience. The neck turned freely. The head turned on the neck the way a person's head turns on a person's neck. These are not subtle distinctions that require expertise to observe. They are the fundamental visible differences between a 4-legged animal occasionally on 2 legs and an animal that lives on 2 legs. At 70 yards through 8-power glass in good light, those differences were not ambiguous. I also want to be precise about the size. A large black bear boar in the Ouachita Mountains might stand 5.5 feet when fully upright, and a very large individual might approach 6 feet. What I was looking at through my binoculars was clearing the lower branches of the white oaks in the flat. I have walked that flat in every season for 22 years, and I know the height of the lower branches on those oaks. They run between 7 and 8 feet on the mature trees. The animal was not ducking under them. It was clearing them by 6 inches to a foot. That is not a black bear. After lunch, we went back out and walked south to the creek drainage where it had entered the cover. Soft ground at the creek bank. The drainage had some standing water from rain the previous week, and the clay substrate was still holding impressions cleanly. 2 complete prints and portions of 3 others. I had my phone out before I was done looking at the first one. I photographed all of them before we touched anything. 6 angles on each complete print, a wide shot showing all 5 impressions in sequence. Then I got the tape out. 2 complete prints left and right of the same stride. 5 toes on each, no claw marks above the toe pads. The heel impressions were deep and round with the compression ring of significant mass around them. The sole showed the specific flat-footed plantigrade profile of a bipedal animal. The arch absent in the way an arch is absent in a large primate foot rather than in a human foot. The stride between the 2 complete prints, heel point to heel point, measured 61 inches. I have measured deer tracks and bear tracks and coyote tracks and turkey scratchings in this drainage for 22 years. I do not carry a measuring tape for any of those because I can read them by eye well enough for hunting purposes, and the measurement is not what matters. I carry the tape because 4 years ago, on a different morning at a different section of this same creek, I found a single track I could not account for and did not have the equipment to document properly and have regretted it since. When I found these, I was ready. Cody stood behind me while I measured and photographed. He said, "Do you want to follow it?" The creek drainage runs south for about 2 miles before it opens into a larger bottomland flat, and the cover in that drainage is the kind of dense creek bottom cover that accumulates when nobody is managing it. Cane, river birch, Arkansas rose, the kind of tangled understory that limits visibility to 10 yards in places. 2 miles of that following a large animal of unknown disposition in the late afternoon. I thought about it and I said no. Cody said probably right. We went back to camp and I called Warren Peck. Warren runs cattle on the adjoining 800 acres to the east and has been hunting the same general drainage for 30 years, 15 of them alongside me on neighboring leases. He is a careful man and a straight talker, and when I described what we had seen, he did not interrupt me, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I am going to tell you something I did not say anything about in August." He told me about his east fence line, a section of 5-strand barbed wire fence running along a creek bank, and in August he had found a section of it pressed down. Not broken, not torn, the post still standing, but the top strand compressed to the height of the second strand over about 3 feet of span, as if something had leaned on it going over rather than catching and tearing through. He had found hair on the barb at the compression point. Dark, coarse, not deer and not cow. Deer hair is hollow and brittle in a specific shade of gray-brown that is nothing like what he was describing. He had pulled the hair free and put it in a Ziploc and put it in his truck and not done anything with it because he did not know what to do with it. I said, "Do you still have it?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Do not throw it away." He drove over the following morning and we walked his east fence line and he showed me the compression section. The wire had rebounded some over the month since August, but the set of the strands still showed where the weight had been. And on the top barb at the compression midpoint there were 3 strands of dark hair still caught that he had missed when he pulled the sample. I photographed them before I touched them, and then I pulled them and added them to the Ziploc. The fence is at the base of a creek bank that runs roughly north to south. The compression was on the southbound crossing, which was the direction our animal had been traveling. I noted that in my phone. I sent everything to a researcher named Otis Garneau in Little Rock 6 weeks after the season ended. He had been referenced in a documented Ouachita account I found online while I was trying to understand what I had seen, and he responded to my message within a day. He drove out to the Lease on a Saturday in December and spent 4 hours on the property, walking the flat, walking the creek drainage, looking at the track photographs on my phone, examining the fence section with Warren. He said the track morphology and measurement were consistent with the documented record from the Ouachita region and from the broader Central Appalachian and Ozark range that the Ouachita connects to at its northern margin. He said the stride was in the expected range for an adult individual, and that the substrate compression pattern was consistent with significant mass, which he estimated at conservatively 400 kilograms based on the depth of the heel impressions relative to the soil moisture conditions I had described. He said the fence compression was physically consistent with an animal of that mass crossing a 5-strand wire fence by pressing down rather than jumping, which would require the ability to grip or brace against the compression, evidence of hand use rather than body weight alone. He sent the hair to a lab he works with in Oregon. The result came back 6 weeks later. Human mitochondrial DNA, unknown individual, no match in any reference database. He said that result was consistent with the pattern of hair sample analyses from the documented North American record, a recurring result of primate consistent DNA that matches no known individual and no known species exactly. He said the result was not conclusive and that hair sample analysis has significant limitations as evidence. He said, what it is not is evidence against your account. And what your account has that most accounts do not have is 2 witnesses with good optics and good light at a known range with contemporaneous documentation of physical evidence. He said, in terms of the strength of the evidentiary package, this is in the upper tier of what I have reviewed from this region. Cody was with me for that conversation. He listened to all of it, and when Otis finished, he said, "So what do you do with it?" Otis said, "I add it to the record and I keep working." Cody nodded. He said, "Fair enough." Then he asked Otis if he wanted to see the drawing he had made at camp, and Otis said yes, and Cody went to his truck and got it. Otis looked at the drawing for a long time. He said, "Can I photograph this?" Cody said yes. Otis photographed it and then handed it back. Cody rolled it up and put it back in his truck. It is still there. That evening I called my lease neighbor, a man named Warren Peck, who runs cattle on the adjoining property, and who has been hunting this drainage for longer than I have. I told him what we had seen, and I described it carefully, and when I finished he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I found something on my east fence line in August that I did not know what to make of." He described a section of fence that had been pressed down. Not broken, pressed. The top wire compressed to the height of the second wire over a span of about 3 feet, with hair on the barb at the compression point. Dark hair, coarse, not deer hair, and not cow hair, and not the texture of any animal he could identify from 30 years of working that land. He had not called anyone about it. He had noted it and moved on and filed it away in the place where things go when you do not have a framework for them. Hearing my account gave it a framework, or at least a direction, and he said, "I should have called you in August." I said, "Probably, but I would not have known what to tell you then either." He sent me a photograph of the hair he had pulled from the barb. I have it on my phone alongside the track photographs. I sent both to a researcher in Little Rock named Otis Garneau, who has been working the Ouachita documented record for 9 years, and who drove out to the Lease the following weekend to walk the flat and the creek drainage with me. Otis looked at the track photographs on my phone while standing in the flat where the animal had crossed, with the white oaks around him and the sight lines I had described visible in every direction. He said, "The measurement and morphology are consistent with what I have documented from this region." He said the Ouachita Mountains have a more substantial documented record than most people are aware of, going back to accounts from the early 20th century, and that the Polk County drainage had produced 2 prior documented cases in his files that he had not been able to cross-reference with any known animal. He said the fence hair Warren had pulled was worth sending to a lab, which he arranged. The lab result came back 6 weeks later. Human mitochondrial DNA, unknown individual, no match in any reference database. Otis said that result was consistent with what the existing hair sample analyses from the broader North American record had produced, a pattern of samples testing as primate, specifically as either human or closely related to human, with no match to any known individual. He said the result was not conclusive and that hair sample analysis has significant limitations, but that it was consistent with the hypothesis and not inconsistent with any element of the observed account. Cody was with me when Otis gave us that summary. He listened carefully, and when Otis finished, he said, "So the hair is not from any known animal." Otis said, "That is what the result shows." Cody said, "And the tracks are consistent with what you have documented elsewhere." Otis said, "Yes." Cody said, "So what do you do with that?" Otis said, "I add it to the record and I keep looking." Cody thought about that. He said, "Fair enough. Cody has not talked about what we saw with anyone outside the family, which is his choice, and I respect it. He is 23 now. Works the same equipment maintenance job he was doing when this happened. Has a girl he has been seeing for about a year who he has not told, and who he says he does not plan to tell for a while yet. He still comes out to the Lease every October. He sits in the same blind on the south edge of the lower flat. He watches the north end of the flat where the pine transitions to hardwood, and we do not say what we are watching for, but we are both watching for it. I have thought about what the account costs Cody relative to what it costs me, and I think it costs him more in some ways. He is 23 years old in a small community in Polk County where he works and lives and is known. And the kind of story I am telling here carries a weight that is harder to carry at 23 than it is at 54. I am at a point in my life where my professional standing and my social standing are both established enough that saying something unprovable about something I saw in the woods is a cost I can absorb. He is not there yet. So he keeps it in the family, and I keep his name out of the account as much as I can, and the drawing stays rolled up in his truck. And every October we both go back and sit in the blind and watch the north end of the flat. That is the shape of what this account has produced. Not resolution, not certainty, not the kind of conclusion that closes a question. The shape of it is, two men in a box blind on a bright October morning saw something cross an open hardwood flat in the Ouachita Mountains, and neither of them has been able to put it down since. And they go back every October because the going back is the only response available that feels adequate to what they saw. We have not seen anything like it again in 4 seasons of returning. We have found 3 additional tracks in the creek drainage. 2 I was able to photograph, 1 I was able to measure before the substrate degraded. The measured one ran 17 inches in length with a stride of 58 inches. I have those photographs in a folder on my phone alongside the track photographs from the original morning and the fence hair photograph and Otis's written summary of the DNA result, all of it kept the same way I keep photographs of good bucks. As a record of something real that happened on that land, witnessed by my own eyes and my son's eyes, documented and analyzed and not resolvable into any known category. The Ouachita Mountains are old country. Dense canopy, creek-cut hollows that fold back on themselves for miles without opening up, hardwood mass that feeds a deer population I have been hunting for 22 years without exhausting, black bear in numbers that the state takes seriously, timber rattler and copperhead in the rocky draws above the creek bottoms. It is the kind of country that keeps things. Old country keeps things well. Whatever crossed my hardwood flat in October in full morning light had kept itself well enough that I had not found it in 22 years of being in that drainage, and whatever is still in that drainage keeps itself just as well now. The Patterson-Gimlin film was shot October 20th, 1967 in Bluff Creek, California, and it has never been definitively explained or debunked in nearly 60 years. The subject of that film walked across a gravel bar in full afternoon light at a range of a few dozen yards and was filmed. And the footage is still the best documentation of this animal that exists. What I saw crossed my hardwood flat in full morning light at 70 yards. And 2 of us were on it with binoculars, and what we saw was consistent with what is in that film in the ways that matter. The build, the gait, the arm carriage, the unhurried movement of something that does not expect to be observed and is not significantly concerned when it is. I did not have a camera ready. I had binoculars and 22 years of knowing that flat, and a son beside me who had been in the woods since he was 8 years old. What I had was enough to know what I saw. It will have to be enough for the record, too. I go back every October. I sit in the cedar blind on the south edge of the lower flat, and I watch the north end where the pine transitions to hardwood, and I remember the specific quality of that morning. The October light through the white oaks, the color of the leaves, the pace and the arm swing and the course correction when it turned its head and saw the blind. I carry a measuring tape in my pack. Cody carries one in his. Some things you do not go back to unprepared. That is the lesson this October taught me, and it is the only lesson that translates cleanly into an action. The flat is the same flat. The white oaks are still there, and the creek drainage is still there, and whatever used it that morning is still, in all probability, using it. It was there before my lease, and it will be there after my lease. And every October I am in that country, it is in that country too. And one of those Octobers we may see each other again in the morning light on the flat. I will be there. I will be ready. I will have the tape in my pack, and I will not regret it. Whatever else I am when October comes, I will be ready.